Welcome to the Performance Around the Clock podcast. I am Professor Satchin Panda, a scientist in the field of circadian rhythm. In this podcast, I will talk to experts in many different fields about science, health, and human performance. You'll also find out why circadian rhythms is my favorite topic. I hope you enjoy the podcast and thank you for listening. Welcome to another podcast of Performance Around the Clock. And I'm excited to have Professor Till Roenneberg as my guest. Till is famous for many things that we take for granted in circadian biology, and I'll get to that in a moment. And he has many decades of research on human circadian rhythm, sleep-wake cycle, and he also has huge influence on trainees as well as the direction of research within circadian rhythm. Welcome, Till.
Thanks for having me.
Really super excited to have you. So I think when within our circadian community, when we think of the word chronotype, that's almost synonymous with your work. So what is chronotype and how did you came to define it and how do you measure it?
So chronotype is basically, in my world, a surrogate for phase of entrainment of the circadian program. And I'm specifically saying of the circadian program because, of course, we know better than our ancestors that it's not a circadian clock, but it's many. And therefore, the phase of entrainment of many clocks form sort of the phase of entrainment of a program, of a circadian program.
So phase of entrainment means what time it is inside our body, roughly.
In relationship to what time it is outside of our body.
Yes.
So it's actually a phase angle of entrainment, but the phase of entrainment means if I was left alone as a human, when would I fall asleep? Because sleep is an output of the clock and therefore a very good measure of where the clock is. Where would I fall asleep and where would I wake up on a regular basis? Early or late. And you can imagine early chronotypes to fall asleep maybe even at 8 o'clock, or if they're extremely early, and wake up at 4 o'clock if they need 8 hours. And those that actually go to bed at 4 o'clock and wake up at around 12 o'clock. So I spent my life with entrainment because, of course, I think that entrainment is central to our existence, and we can find out a lot of details about the clock. But in the end, what evolution has selected for is phase of entrainment. Otherwise, we wouldn't need the clock, because it's important that I am being alert and active and feed myself at times where it's less dangerous than at other times, and therefore it's essential to survive to have an adequate phase of entrainment.
So I think let's simplify the word phase of entrainment. So you put it very nicely.
Synonymously to chronotype in my world.
Yeah, so it's in relation to the outside world. So for example, I think we all agree that we all living humans have a circadian clock. Almost all. Which runs.
I hesitate because why limit this to the humans? Even bacteria can have a clock. So
No, I'm saying like when it comes to humans, let's talk about humans. We all have circadian clock that runs on 24 hours. But what is more important from your point of view, as we all know, is when outside it's 6 a.m. to the sun goes up, let's imagine that, then what time it is inside your body. So that phase of, is phase of entrainment.
Yes.
And if you are aligned to that or how much you are.
That's why I very often speak of a biological time zone that I live in.
Yes.
And a solar time zone that one can live in.
Yeah.
And a social time zone that one can live in. And in an ideal world, they are congruent, meaning that my biological time zone is the same as a solar time zone, is the same as a social time zone.
Yes.
But that is not the case, especially nowadays. It's not the case because this phase of entrainment, this chronotype, is not like many psychological traits and types, something that is fixed. It is extremely adaptive, meaning that if I was a farmer working outside, I would have a different chronotype, although I haven't changed anything with my genes, than if I now pick up an office a job. And this flexibility is necessary for the clock to be able to entrain properly, but it's also very volatile if I now, in modern days, where I hardly get real light during the day and I hardly get any real darkness during the night, and I invented a new pair of words because we always speak about daylight in such a way that we even write it in one word nowadays.
Yeah.
And to counter that, because we always forget how important it is, I have coined the word night dark in one word.
Night dark. Daylight and night dark.
And I had a wonderful conversation with somebody lately, and he said, well, that night is always dark. And I said, yes, it may be, but why do we then say daylight? You know, it was light during the day. So in order to make people understand that this is this is the situation we came from.
Yeah.
We had daylight and night dark.
Yeah.
And now we hardly have any daylight, and we certainly hardly have any night dark, except for when we sleep.
When you close our eyes.
When we close our eyes, and our eyes roll up, and we bury our heads in a cushion, and we may even close curtains, then we get darkness. But the trouble is that from a mechanistic point of view, that it is a short circuit.
Yeah.
Because when I sleep is an output of the clock, and now I'm creating with the output the only light dark input into the clock. Yeah. And that is a short circuit, and it creates enormous problems.
So when it comes to going back to the chronotype and phase of entrainment, what is, in your view, the definition of somebody saying they're early chronotype or late chronotype?
Well, in my view, it depends on what population they are a member of.
I see.
Because I was once asked by an American scientist when they should do a cutoff for something that is called familiar advanced phase sleep syndrome. And I said, well, that depends on where you are. Because if you take a normal time and make that a cutoff, you would probably put almost half of the Indian population into the category of having FASP.
Early chronotype.
Because they are all very early, mainly to the based on the fact that they're probably outside a lot and they don't use as much artificial light as we do, which makes them early.
Yeah.
And to that point, I spent many years under the impression I hate proverbs, because proverbs say the early bird catches the worm and that you're only healthy if you are an early bird and so forth. And I hated these proverbs until I understood that they were actually correct, but only in a world where they were created.
Yeah.
In the world where you had daylight during the day, really daylight, and night dark during the night, and you now slept from 4 to 12, you were sure to have an illness. Because normally under these conditions, you would be an early type. And the differences between the early larks and the late owls would be very minimal. Yeah. The whole distribution is shrinking together when you get into what we call very strong Zeitgeber signals, which is a lot of daylight and a lot of night dark.
Yeah. So there is a good example that in India or in many countries where the economy is more agrarian, people are spending more time outdoor, they're more likely to go to bed early and wake up, say, around 6 o'clock. If sunrise is around 6 a.m., it's always, as you said, with relation to the solar day.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the US or in the Western world, and say in Germany where you work, in a typical, I won't say summer, but spring or autumn, when imagine this sun is rising between say 5:30 and 6:30, what would you consider as an early chronotype or late chronotype in the Western world context, where people are indoor and they may not be getting as much daylight?
So the average chronotype in Central Europe
Yeah.
has a midpoint of sleep, and midpoint of sleep is just simply halfway between having fallen asleep and waking up by yourself.
Yeah.
So that is the reference point for chronotype, basically. And the midpoint would be around 4 to 4:30 a.m.
So 4:30 a.m. That's when the half of the sleep is
Exactly.
done.
That would mean that the majority of people would fall if they were left alone in this urbanized, industrialized Central Europe setting would sleep from midnight to 8.
I see. Okay. So that would be considered
That's the normal chronotype.
normal chronotype.
Anything beyond that, earlier than that, would go towards early.
Yeah.
And of course, you find extremes, because the thing of why we have such a broad distribution is that under the new light regimes with too much light at night and too little light during the day, the very early larks actually become even earlier, whereas the rest of the population gets later. And there you pull apart the distribution. Mm-hmm. And if you now increase the contrast between night and day again, you push the extremes towards each other. And therefore, I can imagine, and even in Central Europe, extreme early types, and I've measured them with actimetry and other measures, to go to bed at 8 o'clock. I actually once was stopped by someone, not stopped, but we took a taxi together from a convention center where I gave a talk to the airport, and she said, I can't sleep. I'm always tired. In the evening, I'm so tired that I fall asleep and I'm boring, and then I wake up in the middle of the night. And that's a very good description for a sleep pathology.
Yeah.
So I said to her, I'm not doing anything until I have at least 4 to 6 weeks of actigraphy with light from you, and then we'll look at it. It was very simple. She was an extreme early type.
Wow.
She should go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening, and she wakes up, in reference to the rest of the population, in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But that is for her the end of sleep.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful because it was the cheapest cure I've ever seen around me, because merely knowing that she's an extreme early type may put her at rest, because now in the evenings she could decide, do I get less sleep because I will wake up at my normal time, and it's not a pathological time, it's a normal time? Do I stay up because it's interesting enough, or do I say, I have to listen to my clock and go to bed?
Yeah.
So it was in her hands, and she was not somebody with a pathology anymore, and that was a fast cure.
Yeah. So I must say that Till has collected data from a lot of people, and I'll actually ask him how many people, both by questionnaire and also by actigraphy, which is Fitbit-like devices that we use in scientific research to collect when people go to bed, when they wake up. On top of that, we also collect data on light, how much light they're exposed to.
Yes,
Till.
not all of them, but
Not all of them.
The modern ones always do, yes.
How many people's survey data have you collected in your lifetime from your chronotype survey data?
From the chronotype, so the Munich chronotype questionnaire has collected close to 300,000. It's much more, of course, because many people use it.
But they don't share the data with you.
They don't share the data with me, but I don't need more data at the moment.
But at the same time, 300,000 is not a small piece of data.
No, it's wonderful.
No, it's wonderful, because 300,000 people will give you can slice and dice and figure out whether males sleep differently than female, at what is the sleep at different times. So throughout our lifetime, how do we change our do you see change in chronotype? Okay, so sorry.
I'll get there in a moment.
Yeah.
But I once was challenged by somebody who said, you know what, we make statistics so that we don't have to collect so many data. Why do you collect so many data? And you've already alluded to it. And I said, well, because once you split the population in males and females, you're already down to half. And once you split them into categories of 5 years, you're a factor of 10 maybe already down, and then you split it into rural and urban, and you're another factor down. So in the end, if you ask very specific questions to such a huge database, you suddenly need statistics because you narrow down. And the wonderful thing about this database is that you can actually do that.
Yes.
And one of the things you can do, or several things you can do with a database like this, since we also know where these people live within a time zone, one can, for example, ask the question whether, which would be predicted from what the clock does, the circadian system does, listen to light and darkness, that they would be earlier in the east of the time zone than in the west of the time zone. And we found that's exactly the point. That if you now make smaller portions of this population and slice a country or a time zone up like a loaf of bread, then these slices are earlier by, if you look at rural people, by 4 minutes every longitude from east to the west, and that's exactly how long the sun takes to pass a longitude. That's one thing. The other thing is,
so I'll pause you for a while there, because Europe is so many different countries, and it's mostly one time zone if you take out England and Spain. So are you saying...
No, England and Spain. You're
sorry, I'm maybe confused.
No, England, you have to take out England and Portugal. But Spain, due to the fact that one of the fascist leaders wanted to be in the same time zone as Hitler, namely Franco wanted to sort of go to bed and get up together with Hitler, he put Spain into the same time zone, and they still are in the same time zone, which gives rise to wonderful examples of how humans just don't get it, because they say the Spaniards eat late.
Yeah, I always get that question everywhere.
The Spaniards eat late. And I was in Galicia once, and we tried to get a table before 10 o'clock at night, and it was almost possible, and I negotiated to get a table at 9:30, and we were the first ones there. And then, if you think about it, 10 o'clock in the evening is, when we look at sun time, meaning when is midnight in Galicia of northwestern Spain. Yeah. And midnight in the summer is at 2:30 in the morning. That's their midnight.
Yeah.
But when you look at the social clock on your wrist or on your phone, it says midnight, although it is only 9:30. Okay?
10:30. So 2:30 is the midnight. So midnight will be
10:30 plus half hour is 11, plus 2 hours would be 1.
Yeah.
So it's 9:30. Yeah. When it says midnight, it's 9:30. When you go to have dinner at 10, it's 7:30. Yeah. And that's totally normal.
Yeah. So that's what I always tell, that although it says 10 o'clock at night, according to the sun, it's actually 7:30.
Exactly. That's why we, at the beginning, said there are 3 time zones we live in: our biological time zone, the sun time zone, and the social time zone. And they can differ very, very largely. But with the large numbers, and that's what you wanted to know, is we can also divide this population into bins of ages. And what we found, and the wonderful thing about large numbers, is that the averages you get out of large numbers show you real constants of biology, because they're so clean.
Yeah.
And what we saw is that as a child we are early, although even within babies, you have a distribution. You have early babies and late babies, but the mean of the distribution is relatively early, and it gets later and later and later. In women up to the age of about 19, and in men up to the age of about 22, it really gets later, and it's everywhere, wherever you look. The wonderful thing about these large numbers is that I haven't seen a paper yet that what we've published about chronotype is wrong by people who do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they all find the same thing, because it's such a constant and stable a set of results. In any case, you get later and later and later until you reach an age which we call the end of adolescence, because it's beyond puberty, and then you get into adolescence, and nobody has defined the end of adolescence. We assume that from adolescence we somehow get into adulthood, but I think we get into adulthood once our clocks turn around again, so when they're not getting later anymore.
I see.
And
So you said
these peak times, we do get earlier, and then we end up with what the Germans call nocturnal bed flight, senile bed flight, which is elderly people wake up earlier and are early birds again. But it's a beautiful trajectory of adolescents being the latest members of our society. And many people say it's only because they are adolescents and they don't do what they should do. They don't go to bed early enough. They look at phones and so forth. And that is completely out of the window, because I live in my research with people who don't have electricity. So that means no phones, no televisions, no discos, nothing. And the only people that have to be woken up in the morning are teenagers.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so
it's a biological phenomenon and not a social phenomenon. And I would say, people say adolescents, teenagers don't have to, if they didn't go to the disco, they could get up early enough for school. And I say that's not true. It's their biology that makes them late. And where should they go and be loud when the rest of the world is asleep? So it's actually some kind of a sanctuary where they go to be able to loud without waking people up, and that sanctuary is called disco.
Yeah. So, is there a change in light sensitivity during this adolescence?
Go back and say, so Mary Cascaden has shown that in different so-called Tanner stages, that is ontogeny stages in development, light suppression or the light sensitivity for suppressing melatonin changes. What we have shown in the database, just merely by plotting how much time people spent outside and how much that correlates with being early or late, because the hypothesis is the more time you spend outside, the earlier you should be, because you're getting a stronger signal from the light-dark cycle.
So when you say more time, is it 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours?
Well, it's a continuum, and in all ages, this continuum is a negative correlation, meaning if on the horizontal axis you have increasing time spent outside, and on the vertical axis you have chronotype early at the bottom and late at the top, then you have a negative correlation. The more I spend time outside, the earlier I get.
That's at any
except for teenagers, which are totally flat.
Really?
Yes.
So at teenage time, the amount of time they spend outside doesn't have very little effect.
Yeah. So definitely there is a light component to this developmental lateness.
When you say teenagers, does it continue till say 21 and 22 that you talked about for boys, and then 19 for girls, or does it go beyond that?
here we come into a limit of numbers, because we're not only taking different bins of ages, we're also taking now, we're breaking them down as how much time do you
Yes.
need to spend outside. So we have to bin them not in a 1 year time span, but in a 5 year time span. And then we have enough people to make a correlation. And the slope of this correlation is steep when you're a child. It gets flatter until it gets completely flat when you're about between 15 and 20.
Yeah.
It's still almost flat between 20 and 25, and then it starts building up again and becoming steeper.
So that's very interesting, because there are many teenagers and young adults who are athletes. That's when they have more athletic activity, but many of them do have these sleep challenges. Sometimes they're traveling, and they're actually given this advice that you should spend more time outside to adjust your sleep, to make it more early, so that you can go to bed early and stay in bed for a long time to recover from the injury.
We have to do studies along those lines, because I hardly can believe that this would not be the case.
Yeah.
But the data speak to the fact that it is less a case in teenagers than it is in other age groups.
Yeah.
And I think that, all these things, there's so many questions open, which is lovely for all the young scientists, that can be studied, modeled, and studied again. And there's a lot of fun still for many scientists to be had.
So these are the life course, like we are early chronotype, and then we become late in our teenage, and then we begin to again become early. For women, for menopause, is that a point when you see any sharp transition in chronotype or sleep duration or sleep quality?
Well, we've never really measured sleep quality, and the reason for that is that I don't believe we know what sleep quality is.
Yes, of course. Sleep duration?
Sleep duration.
Or time in bed, for example.
Sleep duration is, we don't see any strong changes from premenopausal to postmenopausal. What we do see is that from the age of 52, about 52 on, the huge differences that were there in males and females over most of their lives are gone.
I see.
And I always make the joke, well, from that age on, we are no distinct males or females anymore. We're just elderly human beings, and we come together.
Yeah. But before 52, so suppose you take a couple at the age of 35.
In that case, it's very, very often the case, or statistically it's the case, that the man is much later than the woman.
So it's likely that the man will stay in bed for longer, slightly later.
No. My joke is that is the reason why, statistically seen, women choose men that are slightly older than them, because they can get up together. Because if they are the same age, then it's true. The man is still in bed and the woman has to make breakfast. But if you choose a man that is slightly older, you come to if you look at the graph, you can make a horizontal instead of a vertical cut, and the horizontal cut gives you the same age. The same chronotype.
Oh, I see. So we talked about how biological days, the solar day, and then your internal day, all these clocks should be aligned for. So what you're pointing out here is, even while choosing your partner, the chronotype does matter.
Yes, and people make huge mistakes in choosing partners, because they always think that a partner who is exactly like oneself is the best partner, and that's of course a myth, because first of all, people go into a partnership thinking they're the same, but then they discover they're not. Instead of going into the partnership and saying, I'm falling in love with somebody who is very different to me. I mean, in most cases, they're different sexes, and it's very different already. But the tolerance for being different is very advantageous during marriage for many, many reasons. One of the reasons is reproduction. Because if they're very different chronotypes and they come into this very strenuous time of their life where they have babies, they can actually
Do shift work.
do shift work, which is not really shift work because it is
I mean,
assigned to biology.
Yeah.
So it is taking advantage of different biologies, different temporal biologies. And I always tell young parents, the most important thing in those times is that you make sure of each other, that you get as much sleep as possible. And doing things together is not the goal, because you should help each other so that each of you gets enough sleep, because that provides safety for not shouting at each other or being disappointed to have children, or wanting to throw them out of the window, or what these young people go through. So if you get enough sleep, you will be much safer in the time and much more effective.
So I guess the take-home message is it's not as important as doing things together than complementing each other.
Yes, absolutely. And when you're different, you start to develop tolerance. And tolerance is probably one of the most important ingredients for a nice person.
Yes, I completely agree. Means many times we are just intolerant of people who are different from us.
Yeah.
And we
Instead of curious.
Yes.
I mean, difference can be so... People travel to different countries because it's different.
Yeah.
But they don't meet up with different people because they're different. I always have learned an enormous amount from very different people.
So how do we... some people are very late chronotype, and sometimes it's maybe due to light exposure. There may be
it is a component, but
caffeine.
I would be very, very. I'm not so sure. Caffeine. I think you talked about caffeine once as being one of the drivers towards making late people late.
But I'm asking you, like, have you seen that? It means I might have made the mistake of saying that without.
Well, I can tell you that any late type who knows that caffeine is invigorating and waking them up will use, especially when they're forced to get up, will use caffeine in the morning.
I see.
Every normal person, and most teenagers are also normal people, wants to be able to fall asleep a bit earlier so that they are not as groggy when they have to wake up. They can't do very much about not having to wake up. So if they find that caffeine makes them late, they will not drink it. And you must have the data, and I bet you that late chronotypes will not have a lot of caffeine if they, I mean, many of them are adenosine mutants where they just, they can drink it and it doesn't do anything. But and they may not be aware of caffeine containing drinks, but I bet you that late types who have difficulties in getting up in the morning will cut down on caffeine in the second part of the day. I don't think it's a contributing factor. In our first paper concerning chronotypes and social jet lag, when we coined the term, and I don't think we have spoken about social jet lag. Social jet lag is sort of a term for the discrepancy between your biological and your social time zone. So if you don't suffer from social jet lag, they are on top of each other, and you basically can get up without an alarm clock and go to work. But if you suffer from social jet lag, then your behavior on free days is different to your behavior on work days, and it's not due to the fact that you now indulged into being a lazy late type. It is that you have accumulated a sleep debt over the work week where you always had to get up with an alarm clock.
Yeah.
Getting up with an alarm clock is a very simple fact. You haven't slept to your end.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah,
It's as simple as that. And if you haven't slept to the end of your biological sleep time, you didn't get enough sleep.
yeah.
I always use the metaphor of a washing machine. Modern washing machines
Yes.
tell you how long they need to make the washing as good as possible.
Yeah.
And what we do every morning is we go to the washing machine and it said, I need 1 hour and 10 minutes. And after 45 minutes, we press the button and say, this should be enough. This is exactly what we do every morning. And if you ask people
No, I
whether
love that analogy that, sleep, even now with the new discoveries in the field of sleep, it's actually telling sleep is cleansing the brain.
it is doing many
things. It's
many
one of the
things.
things.
But cleansing of the brain is certainly one of them. And I always say when you use an alarm clock, you wake up and your brain is nothing but dirty and wet washing. Okay? And my new philosophy, or my new summary of all philosophies that I've went through in chronobiology, is we have to make society understand that it should bend towards the needs of biology and not the other way around. So we have to find ways that the temporal structure of society embraces the biology of individuals and embraces the biology of age groups and so forth, because we will have much happier people if we let them sleep.
But I think this is a great point, because this is the field of sleep and circadian rhythm, this field. It's understanding biology, and that biology has the potential to change public policy. And one of the public policy change that we are seeing, at least in the US, is the delayed school start time.
Yeah.
Is it happening in Europe?
It's starting to happen in Europe, but it's much more difficult because, especially in Germany, we have a school where we send people to school at 8 and then we send them home again at 12 or 1. So that means there's this whole structure of the afternoon where they have sports and other things. And the idea that they come home later is unimaginable for both students and parents. But that will change, because you can't uphold a school system from the 19th century where mummy is at home ready with lunch and is expecting the children to come home. Most mummies are now, fortunately, also active in the outside world, and therefore we need schools from 9 to whatever 5. First of all, because teaching in this longer stretch gives you much more flexibility of letting students work for themselves and tutoring them and do sports. And it is much more democratic, because when you go home to your parents, it depends on whether your parents have some kind of a degree, whether they're able to help you.
Yeah.
And we're losing out on many geniuses that could save the world that just don't make it because they didn't get enough support from the system, because they were sent home and the parents got the task of tutoring them.
Yeah.
So for many reasons we have to change that. Once we change that, I think it's going to be much easier. And what I see is that it is the schools that already have sort of a whole day school, where the ability to at least give buffer times at the beginning, which is actually quite good. Schools should teach self-sufficient work, and therefore they should offer time zones or time spaces within the school day where pupils can work for themselves.
Yeah.
And if you now say, if you want, you can come to school at 8. But you don't have to if you put your self-tutoring times into a different time slot during the day, then it's very interesting, because what we find is that before it gets closer to exams, students actually go later to school. And it's a myth that they go later to bed. Even after a year or two into this new scheme where they can choose to go to school later. They do not go to bed later. So they sleep an hour longer. But what we see is interesting. When final exams get close, they do go to school earlier and learn in the environment of the mentored, in a mentorship environment where they can ask teachers and so forth. So this freedom is, I think, the ideal thing, so that you can go to school later, but if you want, you can also go to school earlier.
That's great. What are the other areas where you see biology can instruct society to change, or at least the policies can change, or designing the buildings or architecture can change?
So school is certainly one of them, school timing. Flexibility of work timing is certainly another one. I always tell people who are leading companies that an employer should actually ask their employees to come into work without using an alarm clock, if they can do it. I mean, we know you have children and so forth, but if they can do it, come and wake up without an alarm clock, because I, as an employer, want to have your best time. And you, as an employee, want to have fun at work. And you don't want to be sick, and we both don't want you to get sick very often. So there are a humongous amount of reasons for why a flexible individual work times are very good, and the distributions of chronotypes in the population still give you enough time to meet. That's a myth that nobody meets anymore. But you should go to work without waking up, and so the flexible work times is again something. And then let me summarize what we also have to do is we have to go camping. Going camping means we have no light at night and a lot of light during the day. I don't like camping very much. I don't like sleeping in tents and so forth. But what I mean is we have to change our urban environment back to a rural environment again, and that's summarized by going camping.
Well, that's actually very interesting, because few years ago I met a reporter for a local TV station, and this reporter at home, they have a rule that 1 week in a month they actually don't use electric bulb in the evening, so there's light candle or now LED.
A whole week.
Whole week.
Okay.
And then in that way they can actually get back to their long enough night, and they go to sleep earlier and they get rejuvenated.
That's a good idea.
Kind of interesting. Like, of course, candles may be dangerous for fire safety, but you can actually use dim light or even LED candles.
That's true. But we have to go camping without having to go camping. And there are two things we have to do, and I've just said this to architects. I said it's not my problem, but you have to get light into the ceilings. Real daylight into the ceilings, because these vertical holes that we call windows, they're lovely to look out and satisfy our visual needs, but they're very bad for our light needs because of two reasons. First of all, if the light comes from the side, all you have to do is turn away from that light, and you lose by a factor 1,000 maybe light. At the same time, your computer screens there's glare, and you can't use them without strain. So if you have diffuse light coming from the top, harvested on the roof. Photons are free on the roof, so we have to get them. They have to find a way to get them into the ceilings of every floor, even of a skyscraper. And one of the ways to do that is maybe light pipes, but there's an indirect way, where I say I put a lot of photovoltaic elements onto the roof, and now I funnel the electricity that I create into nowadays diodes that can be tuned into color.
Yeah.
Because that is another thing that we need to mimic daylight and night dark by changing the the color composition of the light.
Yeah.
And we once did an experiment into the spring with 2 floors in an office building. One of the floors got much more light, several thousand lux, and the other one had the traditional lighting. And what we noticed is, yes, it helps people to be earlier and come to work more refreshed. But we also noticed that only the ones that were sort of in the dimmer light went through what we see in all people, and that is an advance in spring.
I see.
The others stayed put because their main Zeitgeber now was the social timing when they came to work, bang, high light intensity, and when they left, bang, low light intensity. So what we have to do is not only get the light from the ceiling or from the roof, but we have to tune it depending on time of day, into warmer and colder night, into candles, as you said. And we also should mimic what's going on exactly now while we're talking, and that is a rainstorm is coming.
Yeah.
And if you had light, direct or indirect or translated via photovoltaic, in the ceilings, I say you have to mimic what's going on outside, meaning the ceiling should get darker when you have darker clouds outside, so that you have contact to the outside world.
Yeah.
We will always have lights that we can switch on in an office,
Yeah.
but this contact to the real world, I think, is going to be very important also in the future.
This is exciting. I mean, you're coming back full circle. You started collecting a huge amount of data, synthesized it, and now you're trying to change how humans are going to redesign our anthropogenic world.
Yes.
Because we built this anthropogenic world without knowing the importance of circadian rhythm.
Or of any biology.
Yeah, so that's why I say that what we're going through is almost like a lead and asbestos moment.
Yes.
Because we built all these buildings, just like we built all these buildings with lead and asbestos, figured out it's bad, and then we're cleaning it up.
I totally agree.
And we're kind of going through that in sleep and circadian rhythm research. And, you know, this field is so exciting because you can go from figuring out how the molecules in mitochondria change from day and night
up to building ideal houses. Yes.
To ideal houses.
Yeah,
and
I totally agree.
Changing the school start time.
That is the reason why I am in this field.
And that's the reason why I got into this field, because leaders like you, I mean, we see that in this field, there are few leaders like you who actually span this whole gamut, so that people who are getting into the field, they can find their space, they can find their niche.
And they can change their niche if they're getting bored.
Yeah, they can also change their niche.
Without leaving the field, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And I hate boxes.
Yeah.
And this field is so big a box that you don't need boxes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Till.
You're welcome.
This was exciting, and then hopefully we'll meet again in a couple of years.
Absolutely. If there's anything new to report.
I guess there is always something new to report.
Yeah, there will be. Okay.
Thank you.